pretty similar to the way Georgia handled Mississippi State offensively. I think Georgia can do that this week. I think Georgia will have the ability to run on Georgia Tech. I think they'll have the ability to hit explosive plays in the passing game. I think that this Georgia team could be in for a really big day on offense in Mercedes-Benz Stadium against the Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets. I know. I was there last year. 8 overtimes. Haynes King played completely out of his mind. Georgia Tech got up, and then Georgia gets that fumble, and they have a really big comeback in the fourth quarter, and then they outlast the Yellow Jackets. I just don't think that it's going to be like that again this season, and Georgia Tech not playing its best football right now, in fact, playing its worst football of the season, does not help. Okay, it just doesn't help when your last 3 games, 2 of them are losses, and one of them was what I would say is a pretty bad loss on the road to NC State. I think Georgia's going to have a big day on offense. Let's talk about it a little bit more. Ryan Curley from Dawg Post here. Make sure you're checking out Sales Hatch, one of our partners. I will throw that barcode for you down below for you to check them out. Georgia Tech started the season off hot-ish, right? 7-point win at Colorado. Weren't sure how good or bad Colorado was going to be. They're not a great team, so you look back, that one's not great. 59-12 against Gardner-Webb, not too much you could take from that. Beat Clemson at home 24-21. At that point, we still weren't 100% sure how good Clemson was going to be. Turns out Clemson wasn't great. Temple, big win. Went to Wake Forest and gutted it out. I get it. You have to gut it out sometimes. Double-digit win against Virginia Tech at home. Went to Duke, took care of business against Syracuse. And then you thought, wow, this Georgia Tech team might be one of the 10 best teams in the country. That's where they were ranked heading into that NC State game. This was a top 10 in the AP. I can't remember what their ranking was in the college football playoff poll at that time. But then they go into NC State and they allow 48 points. Then they get past Boston College up there in Boston. They allowed 34 points to the Eagles. And then they just let up 42 points at home at night against Pitt. One of those was a pick 6. Haynes King, it was a disaster game for Haynes King. And he did help bring them back a little bit, but then it just was not enough. And they did not have enough juice in the second half to complete a really large comeback. Pitt gets up on them really early. Georgia Tech's not playing its best football. Georgia is playing much better football than it was at the beginning of the season. Kind of have to throw out the Charlotte game, like I say. You kind of throw out the Gardner-Webb game for the Yellow Jackets. But Georgia had a big day on offense. Well, first of all, let's think about like the last month and a half-ish for Georgia. Outlast Ole Miss at home. They got to go on the road to Jacksonville to play Florida. They had to go on the road again and play Mississippi State, and they completely handled them. And I think that this could be a similar game to that Mississippi State game where, yeah, Georgia's going to let up a few scores. Haynes King's going to get his, but I think that this Georgia team is just going to be able to do what it wants to on offense. It's my take. You look at Georgia Tech's defensive numbers, and they're not great. I mean, and you look at some of the big margins they've let up this season. 29 to Wake Forest, not a good Wake Forest team. And then these last 3 weeks, 48, 34, and 42. Pitt's solid, right? It's one of the better teams in the ACC, but the other two are not some of the better teams in the ACC, and Georgia Tech is allowing them to put up points. Georgia Tech had it in control. They would have been in the ACC championship with a legitimate shot at the college football playoff if it beat Pitt, and it fell apart. Were they looking ahead at this Georgia game? I said it last week when we were discussing it in the picks, when we were discussing it just kind of in our previews throughout the week. The Yellow Jackets cannot look ahead to this game with the Dogs. It would be very detrimental to them. A loss to Pitt was going to hurt them way more than a loss to Georgia would hurt them. And now I think that they're probably going to deal with both, end up 9-3 and not sniffing the ACC championship or the college football playoff for that matter. Georgia runs the ball really well. I'll get the rushing stats up for you in just a second. But Tech is one of the worst run defenses in the ACC. They're allowing about 170 yards per game on the ground. Georgia rushes for more than that number. And I'm going to confirm that here in just a second. Georgia rushes for 190 yards on the ground. And that is largely against better run defenses like Texas, who only allows 92 on the ground, like Auburn, who only allowed 94 on the ground, like Alabama allowing 121. And then they've had some explosive days against Florida, Ole Miss, Kentucky, right? The teams in the conference that aren't quite as good at stopping the run. But Georgia Tech has been worse at it than 14 of the 16 SEC teams that are going up against better offensive line recruits, better running back recruits, better quarterbacks, better schemes for the most part. They're lying around 160, 170 yards per game on the ground. I think it was 167 to be exact, 167.8 yards on the ground. Georgia is going to be able to do what it wants, running the ball. Chauncey Bowens is going to be back. And you saw, look, Bo Walker's capable if they need to give him touches, right? True freshman running back. Eye test looks really good. They've got Dwight Phillips, I guess, who's RB4 now. Nate Frazier, Cash Jones, Chauncey Bowens. These are guys that have plenty of experience and have shown explosion. They've all shown the ability to have explosive plays, and Chauncey Bowens did that against Alabama. He did that against Florida with the game winner. Nate Frazier finally had some huge runs against Mississippi State, had a few big runs against Texas, and I thought he had a few big runs this past week against Charlotte. This Georgia rushing attack is just going to be what I think is going to be too much. And then you sprinkle in the fact that Mike Bobo is in his bag right now. He's in his bag with Gunnar Stockton. He's in his bag with the play calls. Kirby and Bobo are very aggressive right now. And you look at that Texas game in particular, you look at the Mississippi State game, I think there were some aggressive calls as well in the Ole Miss game. What do I mean by aggressive? Not your simple handoff, not your simple screen, not your simple rollout. They're drawing some stuff up that is a little bit more complicated. And Gunnar Stockton has done really well with that. I think the play call against Texas late in the game, it was Georgia's second to last touchdown where they really sold the run, and Gunnar Stockton's rolling out to his right. Looks like he's just going to take off for some sort of QB power to the right, and he ends up tossing the football right over the top of the defense into the end zone to Lawson Lucky. This is versatility, right? Rivalry games can be weird. You saw that last year with Georgia Tech. You see it pretty frequently with Ole Miss, Mississippi State. You see it pretty frequently with Auburn, Alabama. Yeah, I think that this game could be closer than people think because that's just the nature of these rivalry games. But I do just look at these teams and I say Georgia's going to have them outmatched. And Tech has been probably not as good as what people thought when you examine the fact that they barely beat a Clemson team that's struggling. They barely beat a Colorado team that's struggling. They barely beat a Wake Forest team that is actually 8-3, right? Duke 6-5. It's just not the same as what Georgia has struggled with. They've struggled with Auburn. They've struggled with Florida. They struggled with Tennessee, Ole Miss, Alabama. Some of these teams are college football playoff teams, and Georgia's winning these games. And now Tech has a couple of pretty rough losses under its belt. Brent Key will have them ready. Haynes King's going to make his plays. But because of what Georgia can do on offense in particular, I just think it's going to be too much for Georgia Tech to overcome. I don't think Georgia runs for 300 yards necessarily the way it did against Mississippi State, but I think that they could reach the 200-yard mark. I think you could see a couple of explosive touchdowns. I'm not really mentioning the wide receivers and the tight ends and what they mean to this offense, and both in the running game and the passing game. I'm really just talking about the rushing offense here. Georgia's going to go in there and it's going to do what it wants. Just like I said to you 2 weeks ago heading into the Mississippi State game, or 3 weeks ago, whatever that was. I think Georgia's going to go in there and do what it wants to do on offense. Run the football. And do it pretty well. And that's going to set up easy plays for Gunnar Stockton. It's going to set up open guys. Tech got boat raced last week by Pitt. Georgia can do that too. I think they cover the spread, like I have talked about in a picks video. I guess if this goes out before that, then there's a little teaser for what I think about this game. What do you think about the game? I think Georgia wins kind of big.